All right, so we might get started. So welcome to the second application support seminar for the Marine Parks grants. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm meeting on today, the Central Aranda here in Alice Springs. We respect their ongoing connection to language, culture and country. We honour and celebrate their elders past, present and future. And we'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Nations people, including those online with us today.
It doesn't matter really.
We are recording today's session.
Sorry.
And this session might be posted on the Marine Parks grants page. I just ask that everyone turn off their microphones and cameras to ensure improved quality. And then if you do have any questions as we're working through today's seminar, we'll have points where we open up to questions. Feel free to turn your cameras and microphones back on. Just a little bit about us. Remote Strategy Plus is owned by myself and my husband Daryl. We're proudly a majority Aboriginal family-owned Central Australian business. My husband Daryl is Central Aranda, part of a big TO family here in Alice Springs. We've got Tamsin Wilmot Daly in our team as a senior consultant. She's on the line with us today. And we do a lot of across multiple industries and sectors to achieve greater outcomes in remote Australia. And some of that work is supporting Aboriginal and businesses and non-Aboriginal organised profits to develop funding applications. And that's why we're here running these seminars for Parks Australia. We do have Parks Australia, Australian Marine Parks representative today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, g'day everyone. So I'm Mike Misso, what's called the Director of the Indian Ocean Territories and Grants team. So what I'll be doing, I'll just be helping Theon out today at different areas, different sections of the presentation, and just if there's any other clarification questions that are needed near the end. So I'll sort of pop in and out, but I'll be mainly looking to Theon to do the presentation.
Thanks, Mike. So what we're going to get through today is an overview of the Marine Parks grants at a high level. We're then going to look at eligible locations, eligibility, the grant objectives, the intended grant outcomes, the Australian Marine Park National Research priorities for the criteria, the attachments to your applications, and how the assessment works. And then we're going to close with just things to remember from our perspective when you're writing grants, and in particular writing a grant application for the Marine Parks grants. We will be using Slido today. So if all of you have a device, a phone, laptop or whatever you have around, if you can open up your web browser and enter in slido.com and enter the number 585524. When there are questions to answer, they're going to pop up on your device. If you have any questions you'd like to ask during the presentation, just hold off until we open up to questions in today's seminar. And you can also enter questions into Slido under the Q&A tab. And those questions we will, if you prefer to submit that way, then we'll collate them and share responses following the seminar. And don't worry, whenever a Slido question comes up, the login information also pops up again if you missed it at this point. So we're going to give it a test. where are you joining us from today and in which state? For example, we are in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. Few Queenslanders here today. Thursday Island. All right, so Slido's working and it looks like we've got almost all the states and territories, I think, represented. So we'll move into just an overview of our marine parks grants. So the Australian state and territory governments have got established marine parks around the country, and marine parks are managed by the Commonwealth and state and territory governments, as well as the Great Marine Park Authority and the Australian Antarctic Division. And Parks Australia manages 60 Australian marine parks in waters around Australia. And the grants that we're talking about today are in place to support projects and outcomes in these marine parks. So there's $8.6 million of funding allocated over 2 years from 23-24 to 24-25 financial years. The minimum grant value that you can apply for is $30,000 and the maximum grant value is $500,000. So funding is available over 2 years. So the commitment that's been made is available over the 2 years, but your grant activities can occur over 3 years, but they must be completed by the 31st of May, 2027. And our marine parks grant opportunities is at a high level, and we'll go into more detail following this, is to support employment and business opportunities, building capacity to take an active role in the management of marine parks, evidence-based decision-making of ecosystem health. So if you are thinking about certification, what areas do you think your project will support at these high level opportunities?
Oh, what happened?
Evidence-based decision making is definitely got the lead today. The next state things I'm not going to open up to questions after this one because it's just such a high level sort of intro. The next thing we're going to talk about is eligible locations and go through some of the more detailed requirements of the funding applications. So there are 7 marine park networks managed by the Commonwealth. So the Indian Ocean Territories Marine Parks, Northwest Marine Parks Network, North Marine Parks Network, Coral Sea Marine Park, the Temperate East Marine Parks Network, and the Southeast Marine Parks Network, and the Southwest Marine Parks Network. So all grant activities must relate to one or more of the 60 marine parks located within Commonwealth waters. Commonwealth waters are those over 5.5 kilometres from the coast. Activities can occur across multiple marine parks or networks. And projects outside of the Marine Parks Network, Parks Australia have said they will be considered if it can be demonstrated that the project will contribute to outcomes in the Australian marine parks. And this can include state managed marine park or land-based activities where the Australian marine park boundaries come up to the high water mark. Now, Mike, do you have anything else to say about eligible locations?
Just a really minor one, the Indian Ocean territories and Norfolk Island. So they're just slightly a bit of a different anomaly to the rest of the marine park network. So the waters there go up to the high water mark. So it's the only areas where you've got the Commonwealth marine parks. So, and I highlight that for two reasons, that just to highlight the Indian Ocean territories and Norfolk Island are included, but just that minor anomaly. And also just to reinforce what you said, Fionn, while we're targeting benefits for Australian marine parks, as you said, a proposal that connects, say, for example, state waters with Australian marine park waters, and just say there was a traditional owner group who wanted to do a project that connected those waters, that could meet the criteria depending on what the proposal was. So, yeah, so while it is targeting Australian marine parks, some of those activities could actually occur, especially where you've got an ecological or cultural connectivity of those waters. So that's probably just worth keeping in mind. And also what that can do, depending on the proposal, it can show a good degree of collaboration, which we always encourage in applications.
Thank you. So does anyone have any questions relating to eligible locations? I've just put the map back up on the screen as well. Right, if there's no questions, I'll move through. Which Australian marine park network do you think your project will relate to? So if it relates to multiple, you can select multiple. If it relates to one, then just select one. Sorry, someone's put their hand up. If you do want to just ask that question.
Yes, it's Glenn Hines from Edith Cowan University here. The project that I'm thinking about is related to turtle nesting, loggerhead turtle nesting, which would be in the Northwest Marine Park Network, or related. It's certainly related to that, and it's within the Ningaloo and Shark Bay marine parks, but it's above the nesting of the turtles, actually above the high water mark. Would that still be applicable?
Wrote a mic for that one, I think.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. It's hard to say whether it would be competitive because we just don't know how many applications. But if you can demonstrate linkages between that project and, as we said, the Australian marine parks and the state waters, then that really strengthens that application. So that would be the link I would draw there. So if it was purely just to do with nesting turtles and that was all you're looking at, that might be a harder case to sort of meet the criteria, if you like, than if you can show that connectivity. So probably with that one, if you sort of go back to the grant objectives and outcomes and just make sure that whatever your proposal is, you link it to that and can then demonstrate how it does support and benefit Australian marine parks.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. It's very much linked to the to the marine parks themselves, because we're dealing with predation that can affect the population. So I think you've answered my question. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. So we'll move on to the next section, which is around eligibility. So I've got up on the screen the eligibility requirements. An applicant must be one of these entities to be able to apply. And this information is all available in the grant application guidelines as well. If you're not sure what type of entity you are applying on behalf of, you can go to abr.business.gov.au and enter your ABN, and the entity type will be listed along with other key details about the organisation or entity. Eligibility requirements: applicants have to have a bank account with an Australian financial institution. You have to respond to the assessment criteria. You have to certify that the project does not duplicate other government-funded management actions. And that can include government activities already underway or government-funded activities already underway. You have to certify that you don't have any overdue reports and acquittals or debts for the Australian government. Might be asked to supply details of other projects that you're managing and just provide some evidence that you can handle managing this project along with responsibilities. Who is not eligible to apply is probably equally as important. Partnerships, international entities, a person or an individual, an unincorporated association, a sole trader, a non-corporate Commonwealth entity, or an organisation, or your project partner is an organisation that's included in the National Redress Scheme's website. Similarly, if the organisation or partner is included on the Workplace Gender Equality Agency website as non-compliant. Mike, do you have anything else to add around eligibility?
No, I think you've covered that one, Fion. Probably the only thing there is just highlighting going back to the guidelines, but I think you've covered everything.
Yeah. Does anyone on the line have any questions around eligibility? So just to get a read on everyone in the room, if you're thinking of applying, what type of entity would you be applying on behalf of? Right. There's also unsure down the bottom if you're not sure. Right, it's good to see Indigenous corporation representation today. All right, we'll move on to the next stage, grant objectives. Probably one, if not the most important pieces of information for people who are applying. So the grant objectives are obviously why the Commonwealth is choosing to invest, and the grant objectives are what the Commonwealth are trying to achieve with the grant funding to reach their own priorities. So the first grant objective is to support traditional owners to maintain their traditional knowledge, cultural sites and values associated with sea country in Australian marine parks. The second, enhance the capacity of traditional owners to engage in marine park management, including leading and participating in research and monitoring projects within sea country in Australian marine parks. Third, develop and implement management solutions to help enhance the health, ecological resilience and sustainable economic use of the Australian marine park network, including in the face of climate-related changes and other emerging pressures. Support research and monitoring that aligns with Australian marine park science priorities and will help inform the 10 yearly statutory review processes for marine park management plans and protection of marine park values. Now, Mike, do you have anything that you want to say here just around these objectives and how important they are?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. I'll add a few things there. So as you can see by the objectives, sort of self-explanatory, there is a really big focus on First Nations engagement and priorities from First Nations. So that doesn't necessarily mean all the projects have to be submitted by Indigenous or First Nations organisations, but where there's a project that is, say, from a research institute, it's really working with those communities would be seen as very favourable. And then probably the other one, I'll just highlight more as an awareness of what we mean by the 10-year statutory review of the management plan. So our marine park management plans are 10-year plans. They're legally required under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and they were prepared in 2018 and they'll expire in 2028. So what that last objective is talking about is things that could help us to inform the preparation of the new management plans. So probably just, again, reinforcing what you said, Fiona, it's really the grant objectives and outcomes are really the key, along with the selection criteria. And we will talk a bit later about some science priorities that we put on the website just to guide people to what some science projects will be. But it's even with those priorities there, it's really going back to the objectives and the outcomes that are going to be the things that we will assess when we look at the applications.
Thanks, Mike. Does anyone have any questions about that, about the objectives? We're going to move into outcomes after this section. I'll move through. So just for you to do a bit of reflection on the objectives, what objectives do you think your project is going to support? And you obviously can select more than one objective. It's really good. We're getting quite an even spread today, and it's good to see the traditional owner objectives sitting so high today. As Mark said, they are well represented in the objectives, and as we move through into the outcomes, they're engaging with First Nations people and traditional owners is really high on Parks Australia's priorities. Great. Thank you. So the grant outcomes, we'll go through them next. The grant outcomes are the types of outcomes that Parks Australia would like to see your projects achieving. So while the objectives are about the objectives of the Commonwealth in committing the funding, and so all applications have to have a link back to those objectives, the grant outcomes are the types of outcomes that they would like projects to be able to deliver. So active engagement of First Nation peoples in the management and protection of the marine environment in or adjacent to Australian marine parks. Enhanced capacity of First Nations peoples to manage sea country in or adjacent to Australian marine parks. Increased First Nations employment and business associated with the sustainable use and management of sea country in or adjacent to Australian marine parks. Enhanced protection and conservation of biodiversity and other natural, cultural and heritage values of marine parks in the Australian Marine Park Network. Improved ecosystem health and resilience and greater understanding of Australian marine park values and the pressures impacting on them. Scientific information to support evidence-based marine park management, such as to inform environmental assessments, adaptation and restoration activities, and review the preparation of Australian marine management plans. Research and monitoring to contribute to the sustainable use and management of Australian marine parks. And then, Mike, that's the last grant outcome. Do you want to add anything in there?
Yeah, Fiona, I'll just focus on the First Nations or Indigenous employment and business opportunities. So, as an example, if a scientist or another proponent has an idea for a grant project, if that's done in collaboration with a remote community, as an example, then there can be those flow-on benefits of engaging the rangers in some of the work programs. So they may actually become like a fee-for-service arrangement. So think pretty flexibly, because when you look at it, might think, well, how's this going to support business and employment? But it could be through those, directly engaging ranger groups to deliver some of the services, or being involved as part of survey crews. So yeah, just think quite laterally with that one. Yeah, that's probably it, Leon. I think mostly self-explanatory there.
Does anyone have any questions relating to the intended grant outcomes? Through. So when you're looking at the outcomes that we've just talked through and thinking about your project, select the outcomes that you think your project will be able to contribute to. And as Mike said, you can see there is a clear priority here in valuing First Nations engagement and engaging First Nations people in the delivery of the project and outcomes during and after the projects. And there's many ways that you can do that, as Mike said, from active engagement right through to partnership and engaging, I guess, First Nations organisations, entities and people in the delivery of the project through employment, contracting, subcontracting and the like. So research and monitoring, the top of the outcomes today, and scientific information to support evidence-based marine park management, and enhancing capacity of First Nation peoples to manage sea country in or adjacent to Australian marine parks. Enhanced protection, improved ecosystem health and resilience, engagement of First Nation peoples, and Nations employment and business associated with the sustainable use and management of sea country. So we're just going to go through the national research priorities that Australian marine parks have established. These are available on our Marine Parks Grant website page. Partnerships with science community, marine management agencies, sea country managers, marine park users are critical. And these research priorities can be used to guide the preparation of your application, particularly when there's a research focus. But the list that has been developed isn't exhaustive. It's not it must align with these. It's just a guide. If you have a research project that hasn't been considered or you think it's going to meet a gap, as long as it meets the guide objectives and outcomes and the selection criteria, it's still able to be submitted and assessed. So I won't go through everything in the right-hand column, and slide decks will be made available following the seminars as well. And as I said, these are all available for you to interrogate further. Pressures, climate change, what's the vulnerability of Australian marine park values, including reef and seagrass, climate change, species shifts, what are the implications of species distribution shifts associated with climate change and other climate-related impacts, biosecurity, what's the vulnerability of AMPs to invasive species, how can management of biosecurity risks be improved, ecosystem function, so reef connectivity, what is the connectivity of inshore and offshore coral reefs, social and economic, so Australian marine park valuation, how can we value Australian marine parks ecosystem and provisioning services in economic or wellbeing terms, and Australian marine park benefits for First Nations people. What are the real and potential social, cultural and economic benefits arising from Australian marine parks for traditional owners and sea country managers? Improving research and knowledge management processes and systems. So knowledge transfer, what innovative approaches can be applied to the transfer of knowledge in support of marine parks management, cost-effective research methods, what innovative methods are available to research and monitor large, remote, vast and deep AMPs, and understanding ecosystems and species of conservation interest, which is quite a broad one as well. Mike, do you want to add anything about these research priorities that I haven't highlighted?
Fiona, just to reinforce what you said, these are a guide, but going back to the objectives is really the key, and the selection criteria. But just on the species of interest, I just want to sort of highlight how you might bring that into a project that could engage traditional owners, even if the initial focus of the project is, say, on a particular species or habitat, I'll say as well. So it might be an offshore reef habitat. So again, that might be the focus that you're trying to do the research on. But yeah, just just think about how you might be able to bring the regional traditional owners into those sort of projects. So, and the other one with Christmas and Cocos Islands. So whilst there's not Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people on those islands, and the same with Norfolk Island, there's local communities have really strong cultural connections and affinities to those places. So if you were thinking of projects, say at Norfolk or Indian Ocean territories, don't be put off by the fact that those communities aren't recognised as First Nations, but they are very strong cross-cultural communities. And in fact, the selection criteria specifies, how are you going to engage First Nations people or community groups. So just to reinforce that one.
Thank you, Mike. There's a question that's come up. If we're thinking about applying for a project which is a little bit out of the box, is it worth having a conversation with the funding manager? I'll just add that we are providing some grant writing services support, and it might be, even as a starting point, signing up for just a quick chat with us, and then we can refer back to Parks Australia team just to test if there's any if we think there might be any issues with it. But I think if it's out of the box but it meets the grant objectives and it meets the outcomes, that's what you need to, if you can show that your project can help the Commonwealth meet its objectives and the project will achieve any of those outcomes, then it's worth considering putting in an application.
Yeah, and as you said, Fiona, people could initially go to yourself or an initial chat with us. We, as most people might be aware of, as a grant, we sort of have to play a bit arm's length in terms of we can't actually help people individually with grants, but certainly, any clarification questions. And we actually keep a list of questions asked, and then we do the responses. So then everybody's got access to that. So one of those two ways, but happy for a first chat, and then either way, so either to Fiona or through to us.
We'll be giving you a bit more information about those support services at the end. So does anyone have any questions about the national research priorities before we move on? So the criteria, this is where you have to, I guess, frame your project in the way that the Commonwealth needs it framed for them to be able to assess. So there's a 3,500 character limit, which is only 525 words approximately per criterion. So the application form won't accept anything above that. Anyone that's prepared grants before, that you will know, you will know what it's like to be going back and trying to shorten the characters. So spaces are included in the character limit, as are every symbol, letter, every keystroke, essentially. So to help you keep it reduced, my advice is keep it really simple. And remember that your reader doesn't have the knowledge of the project that you have, or more than likely the technical skills that you have. So avoid using or overuse of, I'd say, technical terms. Sometimes it is important, and as long as you are remembering that technical language and technical terms need to be spoken about in a way where the reader can actually understand it. Avoid using acronyms, and when you do use acronyms, follow that rule of writing it out in full first and using the acronym in brackets afterwards. And then just avoid using lingo and slang language. So make sure it is professional text and articulated in a professional way. So the 4 criteria are up on the screen here. Number 1, demonstrate how your project meets one or more of the grant objectives, grant opportunity objectives. That's a 35% weighting. Criterion 2, demonstrate how your project will benefit and engage First Nations peoples and or the local community and stakeholders. That is a 30% weighting. Criterion 3, demonstrate how your project will achieve value for money. That's a 20% weighting. And demonstrate your capability to deliver the project on time and within budget, 15%. So as you can see, higher end here, if you can demonstrate that your project meets the grant objectives, and then you can also demonstrate how you've engaged with and how your project's going to benefit First Nation peoples and local community, that's 65% of the weighting. And then a really value for money, just demonstrating that, you know, the activities that you're outlining will be delivered efficiently and in a cost-effective way, and demonstrate your capability to deliver the project on time and within budget is just around you being able to demonstrate how it will be delivered, by which time frame, and having a really strong budget that supports your project activities. So criterion 1, and this is information that is coming from the grant application guide and the guidelines. Show the need or the problem and outline how your grant activity provides the solution, and talk about the expected impact or value. Always try to link your responses to the intended objectives. Can't spell that out. I'll probably repeat myself a lot on that one as well. That's the most important thing, is to use language and make sure there's focus in your grants or grant writing, where you are explaining to the assessor how your project will support the Commonwealth in achieving their objectives. And then be really clear and specific about the project outcomes that we went through before, that your project will support the achievement of. And make sure that you're clear the location, and that you demonstrate that the location is within an Australian marine park, or the benefit lies in the Australian Marine Park Network. Now, the grant application guide is available when you commence your application. There is a series of support documents, and I'm just bringing this up on the screen. And this is an example of how Parks Australia would like information to be presented. And it's quite easy in the fields of a grant application to make sure you can still have headers. You break up your information. So this example response expresses the need. It clearly articulates the solution and the outcomes that the project will achieve. So it's clearly saying the project will support grant objectives by, and listing those objectives that the project will support, and then detailing the specific outcomes that will be achieved and making sure that they're linked to those outcomes that Parks Australia have listed. So it's a really good, the application guide is a really good supporting document for all of you to access. And as you can see there, there's not a massive amount of information that's being prepared, and it is really simply laid out, and it will support an assessor in making an early indication that your project is in line with this criteria. So criterion 2, demonstrate how your project will benefit and engage First Nations peoples and all the local community and stakeholders. This has got a 30% weighting, and it's really important for you to show how your project has engaged with and will benefit First Nation peoples and communities. So demonstrate the work that you've done to engage with First Nations people, but also think about making sure there's elements of your project, or if not all of your project, has a focus on benefiting First Nation peoples and communities. So provide evidence of your engagement and get written support from an entity or entities with responsibility for representing relevant sea country. So traditional owner groups, local corporations, depending on what your project is, who you need to engage with will be different. But just make sure that you are looking at the community or region where you are going to be working, and think about the correct entities that you should be engaging with and or partnering with in the delivery of your project. My advice here is make sure you do go to native title body corporations, land councils, a native title representative body. Don't provide letters of support or your engagement with an individual is my only advice here. So putting an individual into an engagement position can often put undue individual, and they're more than likely not able to make certain decisions on their own. So it's just one key point that I'd like to make. Show how your project will continue to engage with and benefit First Nation peoples during the delivery through direct participation, capacity building, or communication activities. I would say that if you are wanting to sit down and engage with local corporations, if your project even has that, you can create a commercial benefit and make sure that they're being remunerated for the work in just a simple engagement and communication method. But as Mike said before, think about ways that you can create genuine participation through being creative and thinking about if you were going to set up a team to do a certain activity, is that a potential business opportunity or subcontracting opportunity or partnership opportunity to be developing capacity on the ground to do those parts of the project during the delivery and hopefully have some benefit post activity. Describe the broader social benefits of the project for the community, marine user groups and stakeholders, similar and in line with that, and demonstrate that your project has support of First Nation peoples and all the local community. An example response here is showing a project collaboration between a land council and sea country rangers and a university, and there were letters of support are attached. So you can see that that work has been done to identify different groups, and that the project will aid in the management and protection of cultural and ecological values in the marine park and support aspirations of TOs to develop a sea country management plan and take an active role. So that's linking back to those objectives and outcomes. I won't go through all of this, but there is some really good examples here of how this sample project has been developed in a way that meets this criterion, and that there's evidence, providing evidence of how that's going to work in implementation. And talking about those positive social impacts and long-term impacts. Criterion 3, demonstrate how your project will achieve value for money. So high levels of co-contribution, financial and in-kind, from your organisation and other parties, such as external partners or state territory funding schemes and grants, highly valued Be really clear when you are applying. If you have applied to multiple funding sources, then you make that clear that you have applied and what funding sources they are, but you don't have an outcome yet. And then additionally, if you have applied for grant funding to support your activities, be really clear that you've received a commitment to fund. Be very open about that at this point. It will help you in this criterion. So outline how all the costs associated with the delivery of the activity are price competitive, and outline how large expenditure items over $50,000 are justified. Identify opportunities for lower cost solutions. And for research and technological type projects, describe how well developed the methods and solutions and technologies are. Projects that are more well advanced will be assessed more favourably. So I think this is the opportunity to demonstrate that it's viable. It's viable and it's got value for money, that the Commonwealth can invest in it and know that it couldn't be viewed as a commercial type activity. You're actually outlining activities that must be delivered and that you will deliver them efficiently in a cost-effective way. I'll go into the co-contribution space a little bit later in the next slide around the budgets. But again, it is a really applying to multiple sources or looking at other funding sources that can support your activity is great. If not, be really clear about what you can invest, whether it's money or time and your in-kind services. Put a monetary figure on that and really highlight what you are contributing to this project outside of the funding that you're asking for. So this, again, is an application example response to this criterion. It's structured really clearly, and it is going into the types of costs and what will need to be delivered. It is talking about the larger costs, so the ones that maybe will over that $50,000 mark, for example, capacity building, and a low-cost option is also being considered, and that comes up in the budget section as well. Low-cost option is, okay, this is what it looks like for us to deliver everything that we would like, but we are able to deliver a lower cost option if the Commonwealth can't fund all of that activity. And this is just an example, but I think if you take a look at these application guide examples, it will really help you in how to frame your responses. This is the last criterion around demonstrating capability to deliver a project on time and within budget. This is where you talk about your experience, previous experience in implementing similar projects on grant funding. Talk about the people who you are engaging to deliver the project, high level, their skills, their experience. Talk about the systems and policies and governance, things that you have in place, financial administration, probably human resource management, all sorts of work health safety, all sorts of whatever systems you have that strengthen that your organisation is ready to take on a project, and identify areas of risk. So be really, and I talk about this a little bit later, be really honest about that. Every project has risk associated with it. It is better to show that you're aware of what some of those risks might be, whether it's resourcing, delivery, environmental, any of those things that can occur when you're mapping out a large or small project. Just make sure that you show the Commonwealth that you've thought about those. And for example, this is the grant application guide sample response, example response. And you can see they've kept things quite simple because there isn't a lot of text, but really important just overview around experience, the key personnel, and risk management. Now, Mike, do you have anything to add outside of what I've said in addressing the criteria?
No, you've covered that well, Fionn, and just reinforcing what you said, that go back to the grant guidelines and also the application guide's a useful tool as well. So no, that's really the key. I think you've covered it.
Now, does anyone have any questions? We've got one on chat. Yes, the slides will be available after the presentation. So we'll probably issue the slide deck following Wednesday's seminar to everyone that's attended, and it will have at a really easy way to access at a high level the objectives and outcomes and criteria as well. So the next section we're going through is attachments to your application. There's mandatory attachments to the application that you have to develop to submit your application. And the mandatory one is the project plan template. So everyone that is applying has to download the template project plan and complete it and submit it with your application. So the template project plan actually is, I do a lot of grant writing across a lot of grants, and this project plan is really simple and clear and concise. I think it's great. The point of having this template is to support the assessor to review your application and look at the details of your project in a structured way. But it will also support Parks Australia to produce a strong funding agreement if you are successful. So this project plan and things that you put in here will support them in developing a funding agreement that outlines what you're going to be delivering and when and for how much. So the project plan asks you to address the objectives of the grant funding that we've gone through, and they're listed at the top. And then the template has just examples of how you can respond. They're not expecting you to write an essay against each objective. They are wanting you to just simply convey how the objectives are being met, and then delete the rows in grey and just put your information in the white sections of the table, and you can add other comments if you want underneath. But my advice is just follow the style and tone of the example text. You have to demonstrate the activities. So this is like a timeline as well as for each activity. And I think, excuse me, my advice is make sure you put a lot of effort into thinking about the delivery of your project and demonstrating that you've really thought about the lots of different timelines and stages of the project that you'll be managing. And remember this point up here, that activities can't start until after the grant agreement is executed, which is intended to occur in March 2024. And that the projects can range from 2 to 3 years in length, but have to be completed by March 2027. Measuring success. So project evaluation, so important, and it's simply about showing that you know what success is going to look like. So evaluation, think about what you said the project it would achieve, and think about how you measure or prove that you were successful. And also that includes some targets. So include some actual targets there that you can meet where you can, but be realistic about it. Don't say you're going to employ 18 people when perhaps you haven't even started the process of figuring out how you're going to do that. So you make sure you include a target of engagement to determine and figure out numbers of employment. So just be realistic, but also, yeah, be really clear that you have measures that you will be measuring as you deliver your project and at the end of the project. Personnel and key stakeholders, that's pretty self-explanatory. So your project personnel who will be working on the delivery, and then those partners or stakeholders that are going to be involved during the delivery of the project. And you do have the ability to insert further comments if you would like to put a bit more information in. So national and regional priorities, this is your chance to sort of do your research and show alignment of your project. Look at what exists locally and regionally and nationally relating to the areas where your project is being delivered, and talk about the linkages. It's really important to demonstrate alignment to national, regional and local plans. I would imagine that most projects should have a link to one or more of these types of documents, and it doesn't take long to do a bit of a scan, and I like that Parks Australia are sort of structuring it like this for you, that, you know, show us what other things that your project aligns to, not just our own objectives. And then similarly with risks and dependencies, I touched on this earlier, but make sure you do that you're honest and you have thought about project risks, and you actually talk about how it's going to be managed. I think it's much better to predict anything that could go wrong and demonstrate that you have steps in place or you have ways that you will manage it if and when that happens.
Hey, Fiona, I might just add to what you said there about other documents. So a really good resource for, or as another document, I should say, as well as the grant guidelines, is the Australian Marine Park Management Plans. So as I mentioned at the very start, they're statutory management plans, and they're available on the Parks Australian Marine Parks website. So they can be a good reference to helping to support applications, as Fiona said, to refer to other plans that might sort of strengthen the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Workplace health and safety, extremely important. So make sure that you consider the WH&S risks and put in your responses down in a similar way to how they've structured it in the guide. I think this is also a really great place for corporations, entities and organisations just to share a bit of information about your work health safety practices and any policies, procedures and things that you have in place that contribute to meeting work health safety legislation requirements. And the project plan then has a budget template, and obviously I think most of you have probably developed a budget or are aware of what a budget is. We have to be really clear around the budget line item, but also if the Australian government grant funding is going towards it, then you break that down in that second column. On the right, cash or in-kind contribution, you can actually refer that in, that's your own internal or other funding source. So this is a way for the Commonwealth to see the value of what you're asking them to contribute and the value of other activities that you are contributing to, or if it's a shared split of the same activity or line item, you can put it into both columns, and then there's a total value in the right. Then the second scenario, which I really like. So let's say you're applying to multiple funding sources, but you don't know the outcome of that. Then your main budget template can be that around outlining, this is what best case scenario looks like for us. We get this other funding, we've got this other investment, then we're only applying for this amount. You can do a scenario 2 as an alternative, that if that funding doesn't come through, you can make it really clear that then you would need to be applying for a higher cost amount if that funding and additional funding doesn't come in. So you can be really clear around that in these budgets. Similarly, if you've got a project where you're like, well, we would love to deliver it like this, and it would cost X amount of dollars, and it would look like this to deliver. But if the Commonwealth can't commit that level of funding, we also have a different budget and delivery model that would look like this, so a lower cost option. So anyway, this is a really great way for the Commonwealth to sort of know, well, the maximum we're being asked for is this, and the minimum we're being asked for is this. And then the other attachments that you will need is a trust deed if you're applying on behalf of a trust, and also projects that engage with or benefit First Nations communities. You will have to attach written support from those entities. Mike, is there anything else you want to add as I close that one out?
No, I think you've covered that, Leon.
Does anyone have any questions relating to the project plan and the attachments? Let's move through. So applying, the last step for submission. So the closing date is 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 27th of September 2023 for round 4. So to apply, you have to complete the online application form on Grant Connect. You have to answer all the questions and provide all the information requested and address all the eligibility criteria and assessment criteria, and include all the necessary attachments that we've gone through today. My advice is don't leave it until 8:30 p.m. to start preparing for submission. Get things organised and get things in there at the latest by midday or the day before, because there's just always something go wrong in your submission, or you pick something up, and it's just much better to get things structured and organised. I sometimes like to prepare responses out of the system, review them out of the system, and then just copy and paste them in to the relevant sections and get your attachments and everything done prior. So on submission day, it's a simple logging in, getting the content in there and submitting. Are there any questions relating to applying? And the assessment process. So just so everyone, once you submit it, there is a bid process that looks like this from start to finish. The assessment occurs at the 4th box down. So the assessors start the process and match the applications against the eligibility criteria. So the first step is just making sure you're eligible, that you are the right type of entity, that you have given evidence that you have a financial institution, all those sorts of things. So then they're not even at that stage looking at the actual responses to the criteria. But once you're proven to be eligible, then your assessment process starts against the criteria as we went through it today, and looking at your value for money and also comparing it to all the other applications in the mix. And this is normally a process. So the process will normally start with an APS officer who does the initial technical assessments, and then a rating assessment, and then recommendations are made, and it goes up through a line. And that's all signed off on and approved. And then the selection grant recommendations are made to the selection advisory panel and to the Minister for Environment. And then the Minister for Environment decides on which applications are successful. At that point, you're notified of an outcome, whether you're unsuccessful or successful. And if you're successful, then grant agreement negotiations commence, and a grant agreement is drafted, and the Commonwealth will enter into a grant agreement with you. And there's different ways that they're structured depending on the nature, complexity and risks of the activity. Then you're contracted then to deliver the grant as you said you would. There might be reporting milestones and interim activities that you must commit to, and then there will be an assessment at the end. Mike, do you want to add anything in on that?
Just the point you made about selection criteria, Theon. So that's what we assess against. So that's our way of making sure we assess everybody equally and impartially. And that's where your application and really going back to those objectives. Yeah, how's your application or your proposed project going to address those objectives? So yeah, just keep reinforcing, look at the objectives, look at the selection criteria, look at the project outcomes, and that's basically what we use to assess those sort of 3 areas: the objectives, outcomes, and in particular the selection criteria.
Does anyone have any questions related to that process? So this last section is probably more things to remember, the things that we've gone through, and it's probably me speaking more from someone I used to work in the Commonwealth and assess multiple funding streams and manage teams of assessors. And then currently in my business now, we support lots of grant submissions for a variety of clients for large and small projects, from capital to infrastructure to development. So it's there's just some things in here that we just wanted to close out on. One thing I would say, if you're new to this, is take a look at previously funded projects. So Parks Australia, our Marine Parks grant page, has got a list of previous successful grant recipients, and you can click through and look at a high-level overview of successful applicants in previous rounds, the project title, the project summaries and the funding amounts. And it can just give you a sense hopefully of ease if you're thinking about submitting an application, and you can see that a wide range of activities has been funded previously. And also just to get sort of an idea of the sort of monetary amounts and help you feel a bit more comfortable in preparing an application. Look at the grant opportunity guidelines and the application guide. So these are available when you go into the grants community grants hub and start your application. You can download these documents, but these two documents are really, really great. And in particular, as I went through earlier, the application guide has just got, it can give you that sense of ease that you just keep things simple, keep things short and well structured. We are preparing an application to support the assessor in assessing your application. You're not preparing an application to justify your project or to outside of that. So it's not a, it doesn't need to, your application doesn't need to demonstrate anything else except for what your project is going to deliver and how it's going to achieve the objectives and the outcomes that are the funding agreement, the funding is there for. So in line with that, don't just talk about what the project will achieve for you, keep the grant application guide with you and structure your responses in a similar way. Keep these things near you to look at while you're preparing your application. And I put that point down the bottom of help the assessor with their job. When you are writing your application, think about an assessor that needs to really easily see how your project connects with the Commonwealth's objectives and outcomes. So if you're writing it in that voice, it can really help your assessors in simply being able to convey, yes, it meets this criteria, yeah, and it looks like this. Some of the best applications I've seen are simply, they're written almost in the voice of the assessor, so they can actually then use that language almost directly when they're doing their assessment. Engagement with First Nation peoples and communities. It's really clear from both the objectives and the outcomes that this is a high priority. So don't simplify this. Don't just say you've done something and get a person to write something in support of your project. Actually demonstrate a strong process of engagement that you've taken already. If you have only got time to just start that process of engagement, then make sure your project continues that engagement to actually strengthen it and grow that engagement with First Nations peoples and communities. Engage with official groups and entities and get agreement from them. Make sure that your engagement approach is ethical and actually is linking in with the correct responsible groups and entities. Show how they're going to be engaged meaningfully throughout the project. As we talked about earlier, that could be from partnerships that result in contracts and remuneration down to meeting with and getting engagement and input into your project. Like there's many different levels to this. If you are an Aboriginal corporation, you are able to really hit this one home. If your project is being, your board or the TOs are asking for these projects to occur, and your ability to do a really strong application and here is great. Show how the project will benefit First Nation peoples and communities, not just in delivery, but after. And then get written support that demonstrates how you've involved them to date and that they're on board with being involved how you've said they will be during the project. I think I'm repeating myself again here, but keep it really simple. Use the application guide document, follow example text, use clear language, don't overcomplicate, and remember the assessor has to be able to convey what you're talking about, and they get less room than you to do that. so they have to be able to grab parts of your application to be able to simply convey that your project is one that should be supported. Applying to multiple sources, we've touched on that a couple of times. If your project is suitable to apply to multiple sources and you can identify either some state or territory or other national funding that's available, put a bit of effort into that is my advice. If you can line up the current rounds that are open, you don't have to be successful. So as I said before, you can attach a couple of budgets and you can show, well, we're going to apply for this other funding. So that budget looks like this, but there is a chance we may not get the other funding. So the alternative budget looks like this. It's projects that have multiple funding sources, and that includes in-kind or cash from your own entity, will be, I guess, rated quite highly. And it doesn't eliminate others who, if you can't do this, it's not eliminating you in any way, but it is a way to strengthen your application. And just complete everything. And I know that project plan is an added little bit of work, but just make sure you do put in the level of detail that's required. Proofread, get someone else to proofread, attach everything, and make sure you give yourself enough time before you submit, because I think anyone who's ever been caught in that situation, it's not a lot of fun. And so the support services, so Parks Australia have engaged Remote Strategy Plus to run these seminars, but also to provide applicants with a range of grant support services. Everyone's entitled to a single session with us, and we can just look at your project and look at your entity type, and then we can determine eligibility for additional support that could be available. If you're interested in accessing some support, we will send a link out to everyone following Wednesday's seminar, and that form is also available online now if you want to submit a request, and then we will contact you to arrange a meeting time following Wednesday's seminar. And our first meeting with everyone can just, if you want to pick our brains and get any advice, then that's what that first session is about. And if you're entitled to any additional support, we'll be able to talk through that with you. And if you've got any questions, we've got a grant support at email that you can also email us at. Mike, do you have anything to add about all of those last points that I've been talking through?
No, I think you've covered it, Fiona. We'd probably end up repeating each other with the objectives and the selection criteria, but that's the best thing to point to, and other sources of information can be really good. As I mentioned, the marine park management plans are worth going to. The research priorities, but as we talked about, they're secondary to the grant guidelines and in particularly objectives, the selection criteria. But I think you've covered it all, and I guess to see if there's any questions.
That is the last slide. Does anyone have any final questions while we're all on the line? Well, if that's coming to the end now. So thank you everyone for joining us. I do have a feedback Slido form that I'll click through to now. If you've got time just to complete, it's a short feedback survey. The answers won't pop up on the screen. And the seminar session video will be posted following Wednesday. So I think we'll pick the best of the three and post that online. So if you have anyone in that you'd like to share the session with, you can do so once that happens. And we'll flick you all an email following Wednesday's session just with next steps for accessing any of that support as well.